Welcome back to Newsstream 360, bringing you the latest news from around the world. The world awoke to a seismic shock, a moment that would be remembered for generations as a turning point in the global order. Headlines blared across every continent, and social media feeds exploded with disbelief and speculation. Taiwan, the vibrant democracy that had defied Beijing for over 75 years, suddenly found itself at the center of history. For decades, the island had stood as a beacon of self-determination and democratic values in the shadow of a rising superpower. The announcement that Taiwan had agreed to a framework for unification with the People's Republic of China sent shockwaves through global financial markets. Stocks tumbled, currencies wobbled, and investors scrambled to assess the new risks. Defense ministries across the world scrambled to update their threat assessments, and intelligence agencies worked overtime to understand how such a dramatic shift had occurred. The post-Cold War order, which had seemed so stable for decades, appeared to dissolve overnight. The world's geopolitical landscape was being redrawn in real time, and uncertainty reigned. This was not the invasion analysts feared, not the sudden barrage of missiles or amphibious landings that had haunted war games and policy briefings for years. Instead, it was a capitulation brokered in boardrooms and back channels, a slow-motion crisis that unfolded behind closed doors. The world's most powerful negotiators had worked in secret, trading concessions and guarantees, until the unthinkable became reality. The event marks one of the most significant geopolitical shifts of the century, a moment that will be studied by historians and strategists for decades to come. It brought an abrupt end to Taiwan's proud history of de facto independence, a legacy built on resilience, innovation, and the will of its people to chart their own course. For Xi Jinping, it's a crowning achievement, presented to the world as the peaceful return of a lost province, a triumph of patience and strategy over force. For the U.S. and its allies, it's a strategic catastrophe, a blow to the credibility of American security guarantees and a challenge to the entire Indo-Pacific balance of power. The shockwaves rippled through military alliances, shaking faith in the ability of the West to protect its partners and maintain stability in the region. The world had watched for signs of war, missile drills, military buildups, and tense standoffs in the Taiwan Strait. But the final act was not a dramatic military assault. Instead, it was a campaign of economic attrition and psychological exhaustion, a relentless pressure that wore down resistance over months and years. The agreement, called the cross-strait framework for peaceful development, was unveiled as a pragmatic choice to avoid bloodshed. Leaders on both sides spoke of peace, stability, and a new era of cooperation, but the sense of loss was palpable. Yet for millions in Taiwan and for democracies worldwide, it felt like a funeral for an ideal. The streets of Taipei filled with candlelight vigils, and the world watched as a symbol of democratic resilience faded into history. This unification redraws the map of global influence, shifting the balance of power in ways that are still being understood. It brings an end to Washington's long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity, forcing a reckoning with the limits of American power and the realities of a multipolar world. The island that once symbolized hope for democratic movements everywhere is now poised to become part of the authoritarian system it resisted for generations. The question is no longer if China would take Taiwan, but how the world will respond to this new reality. What will Beijing do now that it has achieved its long-sought goal? How will other nations adapt to a world where China's influence is ascendant and the old certainties have vanished? The world must now adapt to a new reality where Beijing's power is dramatically expanded and the rules of the international system are being rewritten before our eyes. The aftershocks of this geopolitical earthquake will be felt for years to come. The road to unification was paved not with tanks, but with tariffs, ultimatums, and relentless economic coercion, all carefully orchestrated over years. While the world watched military drills unfold, Beijing waged a more effective war in the shadows, targeting Taiwan's export-driven economy with precision. Tariffs and supply chain disruptions, worsened by the US-China trade war, left Taiwan isolated and increasingly vulnerable to outside pressure. Beijing shifted from military threats to economic entanglement, offering Taiwanese businesses access to the vast mainland market, if they agreed to integrate. The message was clear: prosper with China or face economic ruin and uncertainty. President Lai Ching-te's administration was trapped between a public that cherished democracy and an economy teetering on the brink. constant military encirclement and wavering U.S. support only deepened the sense of isolation for Taiwan. Ultimately, the decision was presented as a painful but necessary choice for peace and economic survival for the island's people. President Lai spoke of safeguarding lives and the island's future, even at a profound and lasting cost. Beijing achieved its goal without firing a single shot, proving economic statecraft can be more potent than military force. Taiwan's economic strength, once its pride, became its greatest vulnerability in the end. The cross-strait framework for peaceful development is cloaked in the language of cooperation and mutual benefit, its title suggesting a new era of harmony between China and Taiwan. Yet, beneath the surface, the agreement's true nature is far more consequential for Taiwan's future. The terms, while presented as steps toward peace, systematically dismantle the core of Taiwanese sovereignty, shifting the balance of power irreversibly toward Beijing. Taiwan is compelled to officially recognize the 1992 Consensus, a foundational principle that enshrines the idea of one China and demands a permanent end to any pursuit of formal independence. This clause alone marks a dramatic shift in Taiwan's international posture and internal politics. A new joint governing council, composed of both Beijing and Taipei officials, will be established to oversee the implementation of the agreement. This body will have the authority to supersede Taiwan's democratically elected government on all major policy decisions, effectively sidelining the island's own leadership. On the military front, Taiwan is required to significantly reduce its armed forces, scale back defense readiness, and suspend all major U.S. weapons purchases. These measures are framed as necessary for de-escalation, but in reality, they leave Taiwan exposed and dependent on Beijing's assurances. In exchange, China pledges to halt provocative military exercises near the island. However, the establishment of joint military communication channels means the PLA will gain unprecedented access to Taiwan's defense planning, allowing Beijing to monitor, influence, and potentially undermine Taiwan's military autonomy. Economically, the agreement creates a shared cross-strait market, eliminating tariffs and promising new investment opportunities. Yet these benefits come with a catch. Taiwan must align its economic regulations and standards with those of China, eroding its ability to set independent policy. This deep integration hands Beijing immense leverage over Taiwan's economy, from its world-leading semiconductor industry to its agricultural heartland. Chinese capital and influence will permeate every sector, making economic independence nearly impossible. Socially and culturally, the agreement mandates sweeping exchanges, new textbooks, joint media productions, and cross-strait festivals. These initiatives are designed to foster a sense of shared identity, but also to gradually reshape how Taiwanese people see themselves and their place in the world. Critics warn that these measures are not benign. They are calculated tools to erode Taiwan's democratic distinctiveness and to rewrite its history, values, and sense of nationhood. Over time, the ultimate goal is clear: to replace Taiwan's unique identity with a sense of belonging to a greater Chinese nation, blurring the lines that have long separated the two societies. The terms of this framework outline not a partnership of equals, but a gradual, methodical absorption, one that unfolds quietly, through laws, institutions, and culture. Taiwan's shield is lowered, its autonomy traded for promises of peace and prosperity that rest entirely on Beijing's goodwill. The framework binds Taiwan's fate to Beijing's economic and political will, leaving little room for dissent or independent action. In the end, the agreement is not a merger of equals, but a carefully orchestrated process of absorption, one that redefines Taiwan's future not by force but by the slow, relentless erosion of its sovereignty. For decades, Taiwan's dominance in semiconductors was more than just an economic advantage. It was its silicon shield, a powerful deterrent against invasion and a symbol of its global importance. The world depended on Taiwan's advanced chips, making any threat to the island a threat to the global economy itself. But with unification, that shield has transformed into a golden handcuff. What once protected Taiwan now binds it, as the very industry that kept it safe becomes a tool of control. Control over this vital industry is now effectively in Beijing's hands. China's government can now dictate the flow of the world's most advanced microchips, giving it a chokehold on global digital infrastructure and the power to shape the future of technology. With this new authority, China gains unprecedented influence over TSMC's operations and the export of cutting-edge technology. This is a critical advantage in its ongoing tech race with the United States, allowing Beijing to set the terms of competition. The US and Europe, already years behind in chip-making, now find themselves at the mercy of a supply chain that runs through a Beijing-influenced hub. The world's most advanced microchips, essential for everything from smartphones to fighter jets, are now subject to Chinese oversight. As global supply chains are realigned, multinational corporations must navigate a new landscape shaped by Chinese political priorities. Boardrooms around the world are forced to rethink their strategies, weighing the risks of dependence on a single, politically charged source. Beijing now holds the power to restrict chip sales to the West, potentially hobbling technological innovation and military advancement in rival nations, while simultaneously boosting its own national champions and military capabilities. The world's dependency on Taiwan's chips has morphed into a dependency on China, an immense vulnerability for governments, industries, and consumers everywhere. The stakes have never been higher. For Taiwan, the short-term economic gains from integration mask a deeper, long-term risk. Its vibrant, innovative tech sector now faces the threat of being absorbed into China's state-controlled model, losing the creative freedom that fueled its rise. The free market dynamism that made Taiwan a global powerhouse could be stifled by mainland bureaucracy, as entrepreneurs and engineers struggled to adapt to new rules and political oversight. The Silicon Shield, once meant to guarantee Taiwan's autonomy and security, has become the ultimate prize, claimed by Beijing through economic leverage and political pressure. In the end, Taiwan's greatest strength was transformed into the very instrument of its submission, a golden handcuff that binds its future to the ambitions of its most powerful neighbor.